We've done an experiment, just 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day with 120 people, trading resentment, frustration, fear for gratitude, appreciation, and thankfulness. Measuring their immune response, the chemical immunoglobulin A, your primary defense against bacteria and viruses, the best flu shot you'll ever get, lives innately within you. Turns out when you're frustrated, when you're impatient, when you're fearful, the immune system dials down because you're an emergency. It's not, all your energy is going for some threat in your outer world. There's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. But how do you turn that around? So then, as people begin to open their heart, can that chemical begin to elevate? 4 days, 50% change in the 120 people. Their IgA levels went up 50% in 4 days. That's, your body's immune system is now upregulating genes that are making proteins and immunoglobulins and antibodies that you don't need a flu shot. In other words, your inner state is greater than your outer world. So then, just by doing that, we now know that your immune system is going to get stronger. By the same means, take 120 people or 50 people and measure 7,500 gene regulations. Okay? In 4 days, 2 genes that suppress cancer growth and tumors are activated and upregulated. The genes that stimulate stem cells to go to damaged tissues and repair them, upregulated. The gene for oxidative balance is upregulated. Anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. Just the body's naturally doing this. The gene for neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning. This is 4 days. The gene switches on. The gene for more balance in the pituitary and the pancreas. The gene for the microtubules of the cells, the little fibers that respond to energy and frequency. So in 4 days, we now know that you can change your genetic destiny if you just practice the inner work. We have research to show that 60 days of meditation, 5 days a week, will lengthen your life. The telomeres, the little shoestrings on the end of your DNA, get longer. That means your biological age is changing. So we have the evidence now to show people what's possible. We have brain scans that are so outside of normal that when neuroscientists see them, they're blown away, because the amount of energy that's in the brain during this transcendental moment is hundreds of times outside of normal.
Wow.
I mean, you can't make your brain do that. Something is happening to you, and that person's having a transcendental moment. And we now know that we can predict it, and we now know that we can induce it. Well, I think in order for us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California. I was in the biking portion of the race and was negotiating a turn, and the police officer that was helping me to make the turn had his back to the oncoming traffic. So the moment I made the turn, this four-wheel drive Bronco going 55 miles an hour just clipped me from behind, and I landed pretty squarely on the ground and ultimately wound up breaking 6 vertebrae in my spine, some bone fragments on the spinal cord, and it had created some neurological problems for me. And the conventional treatment for that is a Harrington rod surgery, where they cut the back parts of your vertebrae off and then they screw in these long stainless steel rods. And
that's not just one surgery, that's multiple, isn't it?
Well, it could be multiple, but the purpose of the Harrington rods is to pull the spine back, the spinal column off the spinal cord, and to stabilize it. And it sounded like a good idea for any patient that I see with that condition. I would recommend the surgery, but this was me, and it wasn't so quick to just rush into it. So after 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, I really had to make a significant decision. Do I weigh my old beliefs against a new paradigm and jump off into the unknown and try something new? If there's an intelligence that's giving us life, could I make contact with it? Could I give it a specific plan, instructions, a template, and then surrender it to a greater mind and allow it to do the healing for me? Or do I stick with a conventional model and, take the safe route and possibly have a handicap and live on addictive medications the rest of my life? So I decided to go from a philosophical realm and to initiate that to try to create a new experience. But I mean, really, upon reflection, it's really just two models. There's a mechanistic model of reality where when things break, you fix them. But then there's also a vitalistic model of reality that transcends materialism. And that vitalistic model says that there's energy, there's information, there's an intelligence that's organizing trillions of functions per second in every cell of your body, and if that intelligence is a consciousness and an awareness, then maybe you can become present with it enough to begin to give it some instructions. And so I thought, hell, I might as well take a chance. I can't heal my back, but a greater mind can do it for me. So I thought, if my will matches its will, if my mind matches its mind, and if my love for life matches its love for life, it should answer the call. So I wanted to develop a relationship with it and give it really specific instructions. And if I lost my focus, or if I lost my attention, I would stop and start all over again. And that's really when I started to learn about the mind and the brain, because I realized how unfocused I was, number one. And number two, when we're in crisis or trauma, we wind up focusing on what we don't want instead of what we do want. So turning that battleship around was my dark night of the soul. And
huge. Yes.
I think after about 6 weeks, though, I started noticing some very significant changes. That was the moment when I started noticing those changes, that what I was doing was making a difference. And then I started doing it with more passion. I thought this idea that the power that made the body heals the body. I mean, I believe that to this day, and I believe that the quantum model of reality explains healing better than anything. I mean, you can't explain how even a cut heals without bringing the quantum model. I mean, you can talk about molecules and circuits and chemicals and attractions and repulsions, but that's really not how it works. I mean, that's a model that's very limited. So I said, if the power that made the body heals the body, and this consciousness is an awareness, and awareness is paying attention, then I have to be completely present with it. Just like when you're with your daughter and she's with you, she knows when you're present with her and when you're not, and you know when she's present with you and when you're not. Right. And this intelligence requires our presence, which means your mind can't wander to the future, to the past, and to extraneous information. You have to be completely present, and I wanted to create a very specific instruction. I wanted to reconstruct every single one of my vertebrae, step by step, from start to stop, and repair every single one of those areas that I knew from the scans. And if I lost my focus, because I wasn't present, I was thinking about living in a wheelchair, if I should sell my home or my practice,
right.
Then I lost my focus. I wasn't creating a clear signal. I would stop and I would start all over again. Now here's the problem. I would start getting frustrated that I lost my focus, and then when I got emotional, I got frustrated, then I got more unfocused. And so after a couple weeks, I started figuring out that instead of reacting, just to keep bringing it back, and I was increasing my attention span during that time. And then once I was able to complete a very clear picture, it would take me 2 or 3, sometimes longer, just 3 hours immersed in the inner world, but I was wiring new circuits over time every single day, and it started getting easier, because as nerve cells wire together, you start constructing physical changes in the brain. Those changes then you can reactivate the next day, and they should be easier to select. So it started getting easier for me, and I started to be able to do it in shorter and shorter amount of time. And when I really got through it the first time from start to finish without losing my focus, it was like I hit a tennis ball in the sweet spot. Something clicked, and when I knew that, I knew that something happened, and that's when I started feeling all the changes in my body, my pain, all the sensations changing, and that's when I knew that if I was making those changes outside of me, I should pay attention to what I was doing inside of me and do it with more conviction, with more intensity. The quantum field is the space between the atoms inside the neurons, and at the same time the field energetically around them. So learning is making new synaptic connections. Every time you learn something new, there is a physical change that takes place in your brain. The brain upscales its hardware. So if you learn something in this show, or you learn something reading a book, and you learn something on a documentary, you have a footprint of consciousness left in your brain. So consciousness then has to leave material evidence of what we've learned biologically. And so if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining them. So how do two neurons know how to reach across a bridge and connect? Because not only is there genetic a change is taking place where those genes are creating proteins in a moment-by-moment state where a branch can grow that quickly and connect. When you see these pictures, that's a gene being switched on to do that, and the gene switches on and then there's a physical change. But how those two neurons know how to bridge and connect, that's the field of information in consciousness that they're sharing. And it's that consciousness and the energy that's supporting it that allows that information to connect. So then you think you're this, we think we're our physical body, but we're the field around the body, using this body as a puppet. So when you begin to become aware that you are a consciousness, then when consciousness begins to learn from something in its environment, the biology has to change. So, but it's that field around you, consciousness, that's constructing that change biologically. So consciousness then causes the circuits to connect. Knowledge is the precursor to experience. The more knowledge you have, the more prepared you are for an experience. So you have three brains that allow you to go from thinking to doing to being. When you learn information, you store it in your analytical, philosophical, theoretical thinking neocortex. That's the home of the you and the me. That's that walnut on the outside. And so if you're learning how to heal yourself, or you're learning about quantum physics, and you're learning about neuroscience, or you're learning about love, or forgiveness and letting go, as you're reading the book, your brain is physically changing, right? And if you review it and you think about it, the contemplation process begins to seal the connections. So then your learning is the first step. Now, when you take that philosophical information and you initiate it, you apply it, you personalize it, you demonstrate it. Now you have to modify your behaviors in some way and do something differently. Well, if you change your actions, and then the new experience then is created. Experience then enriches the brain neurologically. Now you begin to add more connections to the semantic information that you learned, and now there's more circuits in place that's mapping the experience through your senses. Then there's an emotional component that's created from the limbic brain, the second brain. Then all of a sudden, if you get your behaviors to match your intentions, or your actions equal to your thoughts, then you should have a new experience, and you should create a new emotion, and you should feel successful. You should feel like a patient parent. You should feel in love with life. You should feel like a great leader. And the moment you feel that emotion, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind is intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind, and experience is for the body. And we could say in that moment, you're embodying knowledge, and you're literally signaling new genes in new ways, and you're beginning to change the expression, not only in the brain, but as well in the body. Now, the new experience means that you have a neurochemical change taking place where mind and body are aligned, but really the mastery of that philosophical information after you initiate it is the repetition of it, to be able to reproduce the experience at will. And if you can do it enough times, then you begin to create networks of neurons that you can activate on command, and you can bring up the emotion from the experience. And when you go how you think and how you feel working together, when you align them, that's called a state of being, and you activate the third brain called the cerebellum. That's where all those implicit automatic skills and habits exist. So then now you are compassionate, now you are a leader, now you are patient, because you have neurochemically conditioned your body to become the mind of compassion, or we could say mind and body are aligned. So it's an evolution, Lisa, of those three steps. And so when you learn that information, that's the connection in the brain. And the research shows that if you learn just a bit of information, you can upscale the connections in your brain from about 1,300 connections to 2,600 connections. That's just learning a few bits of information. If you don't revisit that information, those connections wither apart in a matter of hours.
Go away.
So we have to continuously review and remind.